Good morning. Hope everybody's wide awake. Your technology is working and you're ready to hear some. I'm Linda Moholt, CEO of the Tualatin Chamber of Commerce, and we're pleased to introduce our board chair for 2020 and taking us through this incredible journey, Miss Cheryl Laird from Lamb Research. Cheryl, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you to our annual Key Leaders Series, providing economic and legislative update to help your businesses better plan for our changing world. My name is Cheryl Laird from Lamb Research, and I am the 2020 Board Chair of the Tualatin Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for joining us today. Your chamber is here to be the catalyst for business growth, a connector for building strong business relationships, a convener of leaders and influencers, and champion for a stronger community. The Tualatin Chamber is a membership organization focused on helping businesses succeed. Thanks to amazing volunteers and a dedicated staff, we have much to be proud of. We hope you enjoy today's presentation. Next, I would like to recognize our 2020 Chamber Board of Directors. We're very fortunate to have this talented group around the table, and I can assure you they've been working hard to help businesses succeed. Our executive team is myself, Chair-elect Susan Nowak with Meals on Wheels People. Our secretary is Wendy Anderson with Columbia Bank, and Heidi Aji is our treasurer with Mountainwood Homes. Our 2020 directors are Kate Johnson with Legal Shield, Lisa Rivet with HR Influence, Brian Hansen, who works at Bull Mountain Heating and Cooling, Chris White represents Transpac, and Don Zenter is with Citizens Bank. Our ex officio directors include Frank Bubenek with Compass Computing Group and also our Tualatin City Mayor, Robert Knight with Express Employment Professionals, and Dr. Sue Ricky Smith with Tiger Tualatin School District Superintendent. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. We really appreciate your leadership. It has been such a pleasure working with you. You stay calm under pressure regardless of what's thrown at us, and thank you for doing that. I'd like to take a moment and say thank you to our amazing staff. We've got Caitlin Q, who is our Director of Member Services, and Ida Hecker, our bookkeeper and administrative assistant, has been with us for 7 years and keeping us straight and narrow. So thanks to that team. Caitlin's also running Best of Show today, so you're not seeing her picture. She's making sure that technology works. We're also pleased today to welcome to our forum from Oregon Senate Majority Leader Rob Wagner's office, we have Gordon Levitt. Representative Rachel Prusak has joined us. City Mayor Frank Bubenek, who is also, as Cheryl said, a chamber member from Compass Computing Group. And from the Tiger Tualatin School District, we have one of the directors and board chair, Maureen Wolf. So welcome, folks, to our team. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our first virtual forum of the Key Leaders Series. We're focused on an economic update and a legislative update to help you not only see where we are today, but hopefully planning forward into 2021. We know our world has changed, and we've all had to adapt to survive this. However, thanks to an incredible leadership team from our board members, partners, investors, and staff, we're very proud of the work that we've been able to accomplish this last 7, 8, 9, 10 months. And we are here and continue to be here for you to create that business-friendly environment so that you guys can create the jobs. We want to thank our sponsors that allow us to do this work. Without our members and the investors that make our life or that contribute to the work of the chamber, we couldn't do this for you. And every single member manifests that time that they give in different ways. Some are only able to give time, while others are able to invest financially. So thank you to all of you, regardless of how you choose to give. And today we're going to start out with our title sponsor, Northwest Natural. They're one of the companies that has given not only time, but invest incredible resources to all of our community and our chamber. They're a platinum investor, and as the title sponsor of this series, they acknowledge that advocacy through education and awareness is critical to the facilitation of a successful climate for business. For more than 160 years, Northwest Natural has been committed to growth, prosperity of the communities it serves. Because they grew up here, they're committed to investing every day. Thank you, Northwest Natural, and our keynote speaker from representing them today is Sean Felipe. And this woman has a pretty impressive pedigree, so I am going to read it, so bear with me. I know you don't want to see a talking head reading, but Sean is Vice President, Chief Compliance Officer, and Corporate Secretary of Northwest Natural Holding and Northwest Natural. She served as Vice President and Corporate Secretary of Northwest Natural since 2015 and assumed Chief Compliance Officer responsibilities in 2016. Ms. Felipe also served as Northwest Natural's Senior Legal Counsel and Assistant Corporate Secretary from 2011 to 14, and Associate Legal Counsel from 2005 to 2011. Ms. Felipe also carries a business law certificate and a certificate corporate governance professional with the National Society for Corporate Governance. Wow, Sean, you've been busy. Thank you very much for being here and welcome. The stage is yours.
Well, good morning. Thank you very much for that introduction, Linda. As Linda said, I'm from Northwest Natural, and I'd like to thank you for joining us this morning to hear about the economic and legislative landscape in our state. You hear it often. These are unprecedented times. I think we're giving a new definition to unprecedented, to say the least. We have a global pandemic. We're struggling with recession and long overdue conversations about racial injustice, not to mention wildfires throughout the West. Civic engagement has never been more important than it is now, which is why we're proud to sponsor the Chamber's Key Leaders Series. We need forums like this to outline the issues and find solutions that can help our region's businesses and communities. It's conversations like these that embody the "we grew up here" ethos that Northwest Natural has held at its core for more than 160 years. With that, I'd like to thank you for your attendance today and for the Tualatin Chamber's efforts to bring you to this program. And now back to you, Linda.
Thank you again, Sean, and thanks to Northwest Natural and your team. You guys are just amazing partners in the community, and there's not an event or festival that goes on that you don't support in a broader sense, so we really appreciate that. Next, you're going to hear from the guy who's tracking the numbers, Josh Leonard from the Office of Economic Analysis with the state of Oregon. Is here to share what the last quarter's numbers mean and kind of give us an idea of where the money is going, and how it's coming in. Josh is an economist with the state of Oregon's Office of Economic Analysis. He develops the quarterly Oregon forecast, and I just was chatting with him in the room, and sometimes you're going to hear a little closer update, including like every 6 weeks. He gives outlooks on unemployment, employment, income, and housing. Mr. Leonard also acts as the state's de facto vice economist for forecasting revenues for the Oregon Lottery, Oregon Judicial Department, state marijuana, and tobacco taxes. Outside of work, Josh enjoys spending time with his wife and kids, traveling the state, and consuming Oregon's craft beverages. Go, Josh. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. Morning, everyone. Pleasure to be here, sharing a little bit of our latest update that we gave to the legislature last month. Our next forecast is coming out actually in about 4 weeks, and about a month from now. I am trying to figure out where my slideshow is. There it is. Sorry. And we have a little bit of a good news, bad news situation right now, right? We know we're mired in recession, although there's a chance that technical recession. Economists talk about recessions. We're talking about only when things are declining. When you're at your top and then you decline and you hit your bottom, that's the recession. And then as you start to work your way back up, things are still bad. Economically, things are still bad. We know that. But the technical recession may be over and we're in the recovery phase. And so while things are bad, they're doing a lot better than we had feared. We thought we would see some maybe depression level economic readings, just given the severity of the decline and the sudden stop in economic activity we saw when we entered shelter-in-place style policies, right? We had a complete shutdown of the economy, or large swaths of the economy overnight. And you can kind of see this in this chart. This is an employment chart in Oregon employment by different recessions in the state of Oregon. The way you read these things is you start in the upper left-hand corner of the chart at 0%. That's how many jobs you had with the start of a recession. As you drop down, that's the severity of the recession. How many jobs did you lose? As you work your way back up to the right, that's the recovery phase. You're adding jobs, but you still have less than you had prior to the recession. As you hit 0, you fully regained all of your lost jobs, and above 0, you're at a historic all-time high for employment. And so you can see the red line, the current cycle that we're in, it looks nothing like a normal cycle because of the shutdown. It looks more like a labor strike or a natural disaster. And being a contagious, deadly virus, probably more important to think of it as a type of natural disaster than your normal business cycle recession. You can see here the difference in the red lines. The dotted one, the one towards the bottom, that was from our June forecast that we actually really did in April, just called the June forecast. That was the one that we built at the very onset of the pandemic in the United States when we were entering the shelter-in-place phase of it, and we thought we would see massive decline. Not just a bad recession, but again, near depression levels. The only data we had were the tidal wave of initial claims for unemployment insurance as people were being laid off or fearful of being laid off, and they started applying for the benefits to try and tide them over to the other side of the pandemic. It turns out that we overshot. We were too pessimistic on the state of the economy, and we'll talk about why here in a second. And so we, in our most recent forecast, the higher red lines is our current forecast. And you can see instead of losing 20% of our jobs, we only lost 14% of our jobs, which is still the most severe recession on record. We've regained, 45% of those lost jobs to date. We still have a great recession-sized hole left to go. You can kind of see the top of that, the solid red line is about equal with that dark gray line, which is the Great Recession, but we just went through a decade ago. We know how bad that was, how severe of a recession it was, how long it took to grind our way out of that really deep financial crisis. Well, that's where we are today in terms of the severity of it, and the hole left to fill is proportionate to that. And so we have a long way to go. We think it'll be faster. We think it'll be more like a 3-year cycle, in large part because the economy was really healthy and was doing really well prior to the onset of the pandemic. We don't have a lot of large imbalances in terms of, the housing bubble bursting or the household debt overhang associated with the bursting of the bubble, or the tech-led recession and the overinvestment in high tech back in the late 90s, early 2000s. Some of those sort of things that slow down a recovery process, or you have to work through some of these major issues. And we don't have any of those today. The only issue we have, and it's a big one, but the only one we have is the pandemic. If we can solve the pandemic, then the economy should snap back relatively quickly. But even so, it'll be a multi-year process. And we're not coming back out of this thing immediately overnight, even though we entered it overnight. So why are things better than we feared? Why are the new set of numbers so much better? Still bad, but so much better than previous feared. I think the first one is we didn't give enough credit, or we underestimated the impact of the Federal CARES Act in particular, and all the federal support that's out there. This chart shows you income and spending at the U.S. level since the start of the year. You can see the dark blue line is personal income, total personal income. It is actually higher today. The total amount of money people have that they're earning is higher today than it was prior to the pandemic, in large part due to the federal aid in the form of the one-time recovery rebates, the $1,200 per person, $500 per kid that went out in April. That's that first big spike. And since then, it's been increases in unemployment insurance, the extra $600 a week that ended at the end of July, but now we're getting $300 a week, at least a little bit, until that second pot of money is running out as we speak. And that's really keeping incomes afloat. And so then the spending side, the numbers below, right? Spending is not all the way back. There's a lot of things that we can't do today that we used to do, whether it's going out to shopping or whether it's going out to sit down dining. We don't do that, even though people are doing that. We're not doing that as much as we used to. And some things like elective surgeries in the medical industry, they're not happening as frequently as they used to. So there's a lot of spending that is being suppressed today, not necessarily by outright, government policies and regulations, although that's happening too, but just due to the fear over the virus. We're not going to go out and, put ourselves at risk to do some of these things we used to do. We're not going to go to a movie theater. or sit down or get haircuts as frequently and all that sort of stuff. And so spending is down, but maybe not down as much as we had first thought, largely because those incomes are higher today. And so the CARES Act was a really good Band-Aid, but it's all gone now, right? And so what happens next? The growth will slow, trajectory of the recovery will slow. There will be some hangover, even though we haven't really seen it yet, but we're still expecting some hangover associated with this cut. For the worst of the crisis, the CARES Act really did its job. It's just we need some other policies along the way to help keep support until the pandemic is managed and brought under control. The other reason why a lot of our top line economic indicators look better than we had feared, and this isn't necessarily a good thing, in fact it's not, it has to do with income inequality. This chart, same sort of concept where we're starting with number of jobs in January. As you drop down, that's the severity of your losses by industry, by sector. And as you work your way back up, that's the recovery. But what we've done with the economy is broke it into thirds, into tiers. Top third of industries based upon wages, the middle tier of industries based upon wages, and then the bottom tier of employment based on industry wages. And you can see low wage sectors. So this is retail, this is leisure and hospitality, this is what we call other services. So that's going to be your gyms, that's going to be your nail salons, your haircuts, things like that. That's in the other services category. Right, they decline massively, and they've only seen a partial rebound. And that is where the most pain of this recession is being born. It's being born by those low wage workers in these industries most impacted by social distancing. So what does this mean for top line economy? Well, even though we all count equally in terms of employment and unemployment and the like, and for voting, of course, the same can't be said for total impacts in the economy, because people in the middle and certainly at the high end of the spectrum, they earn so much more money than everybody else that they account for an outsized share of overall economic activity. So if workers in high wage sectors and if higher income households haven't been impacted as much to date, that means the total income and the total spending and total level of economic activity in the economy is maybe not down as much as the employment numbers alone would suggest, because the employment numbers are concentrated. The employment losses are concentrated in the low income sectors. And so the nature of the recession, income inequality and the like, means those top line numbers look a lot better than the employment numbers alone suggest. And so therefore, overall economic activity is doing better, but it kind of masks some of that underlying pain across the income distribution and on the bottom side of the distribution in particular. And so what we're worried about today, looking forward, is kind of this concept of permanent damage during the shelter-in-place phase of the recovery. Today, when we're only partially reopened and we're still worried about the virus, or at least most of us are still worried about the virus. Not all of us, because if you look at the cases, they're going back up. But the people aren't fully social distancing and the like. But we're worried about permanent damage. How many businesses close and how many people are permanently laid off? Right now, a lot of those layoffs and the increase in the unemployment rate still looks to be temporary, or workers think it's temporary. Their employers are telling them, hey, when sales pick up a little bit more, or when we get the virus under control, your job's still waiting for you. We can't hire you back now because sales are down, our capacity in the store or the restaurant is down, and the like. But your job is still there. Haven't laid you off, permanently. We still think we can get through this, and that's good, right? If we sever those ties between employer and employee, it takes a while, right? It takes months to get back into the employment side of things. You have to apply for jobs, you have to go through the interview process and all that sort of stuff. Even if it's still relatively short period of time, that's still at least a few months. And so it would drag out the cycle even further, just due to some of those delays and the hurdles you have to overcome to become employed. On the firm side of things, we're seeing some increase in business closures, not a lot. We don't have great data on closures, but we're seeing some. I think we'll see a lot more in the next 6 months, particularly in the bars and the restaurants as they enter into the wet, colder months where we're forced indoors. And that capacity and the fears over the virus are a little bit more worrisome. Somewhat of a silver lining is in past deep recessions. So if you go back to the early 1980s timber industry restructuring, you go to the Great Recession, we saw a big increase in business closures and a big decrease in new startup activity, new businesses trying to fill the void in the economy and grow the economy. To date, the chart on the left kind of shows you, well, we haven't seen that decline in startups. Right? New business applications are, on par with last year. In some cases, sometimes they're a little bit higher than last year. So we will see a rise in closures, which is bad news. Take time to recover from that, economically speaking. But we haven't seen that decline in startups, which is encouraging, right? It means we're not in that worst case scenario, or at least not yet. And so that's another reason why we think the overall cycle can be shorter and the recovery more complete. A risk to the outlook, as always in Oregon, is migration. Population growth is very important for our state. People have been packing up and moving here since before Lewis and Clark. And so it's very vital. It's not just that growth for growth's sake, what we're looking for. We're looking at, for growth primarily in the younger, skilled, working age household range. They provide an ample supply of labor for local businesses to hire and to expand. And that labor supply, that labor force growth, really allows our local businesses to grow faster and expand more than what you see in the typical state. And so, we're worried about what will happen with this. Migration always slows in recession. People follow the job opportunities. So as job opportunities dry up, then people kind of hunker down and they wait to move until the other side of the recession. And so we have reduced our migration forecast for this year and next. You can see those first couple light blue lines, by about 30%, 33%, somewhere in that range, due to the recession itself, right? And nobody moved during the shelter in place phase of the cycle back in March, April, May. Nobody was moving. We've seen some catch up in moving this summer, strong home sales and the like, but it's unlikely that it'll fully regain. And we're not going to see really, really strong migration numbers due to the pandemic and the recession itself. And on top of that, we have additional challenges this year, but makes us a little bit more worried about the long-term outlook for the state's population forecast, because of all the terrible things that have happened in 2020, the pandemic and the protests and the wildfires and the drought that's encompassing most of the state or was. All of these things potentially could reduce those migration flows more than we had previously expected, more than we have in our current forecast. And therefore, that means Oregon's economy would grow slower in the years to come because that labor supply wouldn't be quite as strong. Now, on the flip side, the one thing that has happened this year to actually boost Oregon would be working from home. We're the #2 state in the country from working from home, behind Colorado. Every corner of our state is average to above average in working from home. That goes for small eastern rural communities, goes for the coast. And then, of course, places like Hood River and Bend are among the highest work from home places in the entire country. Working from home today, working from home is really about just trying to make it through the pandemic, get as much stuff done as possible so you don't have to go into the office. But over the long term, working from home, if this becomes a real thing, much larger increases were already expected in working from home, then Oregon could benefit, because working from home is largely all about where workers want to be, where they want to live. They want to live in nice places. And so that's one of the reasons why Oregon and Colorado do so well on this front, is because they're nice places to live. The key question there, and something that'd be very important for Tualatin, is when it comes to working from home, are businesses going to allow it on a 100% basis, or is it going to be an 80% basis where you can do 4 days at home, 1 in the office, or the like, or let alone 4 days in the office, 1 at home? That answer to that will go a long way to determining what the long-term impacts are on terms of population growth, in terms of housing demand, and the like. Because if you have to go into the office 1 day a week, yeah, maybe you'd rather live in the suburbs than in the city center or in those close-in neighborhoods. Because if you're only doing the commute 1 day a week, it's not fun to drive north on I-5 in the morning, or let alone coming back south at starting, 3 o'clock, right? It's not fun. We know that. But if you're only doing it 1 day a week, then you're willing to make those trade-offs for the more affordable home, the larger yard, maybe the better school district, and all that sort of stuff that goes into factoring where people want to live. But if it's 100% remote, then that would free people up to maybe live wherever they wanted, maybe on the coast, maybe in a more far-flung rural area, maybe out of state. That sort of difference of where companies land in terms of working from home will go a long way to determining that, again, that population growth and the housing demand and the like, And again, we're only 7 months into this thing, so where this ends up is unknown. There's a lot of a lot of people forecasting working from home on a permanent basis, massive increases forever. I think that's unlikely. I think most workers will be recalled to the office as soon as it's safe to do so, which will be still some time. But I think this is something to keep an eye on. So what does all this mean for the public sector? Well, it means our revenues aren't doing as bad as feared either. State revenues on the left, this is our state's general fund forecast. You can kind of see, just note that the dark blue line is above the light blue line. That means our forecast was raised. Just like we were talking earlier, the economy is doing better than feared. It's been raised, but we're not out of the woods yet. There's still a recession impact still to come in the public sector revenues. A lot of the strength in the current budget period in the current year has a lot to do with income taxes from 2019 that were filed in July, right? They're normally filed in April, but we got the delay, so the filings came in July. Those were a lot stronger than anticipated. So a lot of the current revenue is tied to previous tax years. And so we still think there's a hangover associated with the recession, as there always is, but it's going to hit next budget period, not the current one. Still, things are much better than had feared. And we'll see where the budget ends up in the months ahead. On the local side of things, a few notes there on the different major revenue streams. We're seeing a lot of variation at the local level, given your local populations, your local economy, and the like. Places like downtown Portland are very impacted due to working from home, due to some other reasons that people aren't venturing down there as much, in addition to the pandemic and the protests and things like that. But that means that not all of that demand, not all of that consumer demand is missing. It just means that's maybe dispersed more throughout the metro area. Sales tax receipts in Clark County are doing better maybe than anticipated. Possibly fewer people are driving across the bridge, something like that. Maybe in Washington County, people are spending more, so the restaurants in Washington County haven't seen as large of employment declines as the restaurants in Multnomah County. That you can see that in the data, right? So I think there's a lot of variation even among neighboring jurisdictions due to all of the things we've been talking about today. With that, that's all I had for prepared remarks. I think we have a few minutes for question and answers. Here's my contact information. Please feel free to reach out, give me a call, follow us along online. If you're interested in anything our office does, always happy to chat and help out where we can. Thank you for your time.
Hey, Josh, thank you very much. It was an insightful forecast, and there is some optimism. One thing that we've been talking about, we consider Washington County the economic engine for the state of Oregon, and much of that power is based upon manufacturing. How are you projecting those jobs? And I know many of them have stayed pretty strong throughout this time period, but what do you see going forward?
Yeah, thanks, Linda. So what we're worried about in permanent damage, in business closures and the like, is very important for manufacturing. We don't see a lot of growth in manufacturing in decades now, right? And so when firms close, they don't tend to be replaced by other ones. Washington County's mix of manufacturing has been better than most of the rest of the state, right? With high tech, a lot of the engineers and the developers and the like that are out there in Beaverton and Hillsborough and the like are doing a lot better, right? So high tech manufacturing is doing much better than the rest of the industry. Maybe some of the firms are going through some firm specific issues with the vertigrated, the integrated model of design and production. But the demand for computer products remains high, really high, because we're all working from home and we need new cameras and laptops and that sort of stuff. Outside of that, the losses have been relatively minimal to date in Oregon when it comes to manufacturing. We're down 5 to 10% instead of 10 to 20% like we were worried about, but no growth. We've seen no growth in manufacturing in the last 5 months, and so we're concerned about how much of that will rebound. Some of the mills started adding jobs again because the housing market has been strong and the sales at Home Depot have been strong. But even the mills with that really strong demand aren't all the way back to where they were. So all of the losses, we've seen some significant ones in metal makers, that kind of our supply chains of aerospace industry. Given all the issues in the aerospace industry, where we had the issues where the planes wouldn't fly, and then we had the pandemic and business travel and all that sort of restrictions on top of it. I think I think we're in for a tough slog there related to the aerospace supply chains. A bright spot would be food manufacturing that continues to do relatively well. We had some closures down in Salem, but other than that, food's doing really well. It's something we continue to keep an eye on. And of course, deteriorating international relations and trade wars haven't helped the industry at all. So they were already teetering. Manufacturing overall is already teetering in the last couple of years.
Thank you. Just on other industries or sectors that have struggled, like entertainment, we have, as a chamber, supported bowling alleys reopening because we have fitness centers that have opened safely, and we've had restaurants that have opened safely. And it seems like there are certain sectors of businesses that could open safely now, especially as we head into the winter months and people are looking for indoor activities. I know you're not on the policy side for that, but are you hearing anything that might change for that sector so that we could start moving our folks inside when they can't be outside enjoying the fresh air?
Yeah, I haven't heard anything specific to that, but like I said, I'm not involved in a lot of those conversations. I will say, the fires disrupted a lot of things, where we went literally focus, shifted from the pandemic to the fires for a number of weeks, entirely focused on that. Our office included a bit on the economic side of things. So I'm not sure where the rest of the policy is going, but I know that focus is shifting back a little bit to make sure that we're trying to take care of it. And as I said, the weather season, the seasonal component to the virus, if there is one, all that sort of stuff is front and center on the
Well, thank you very much for your time this morning. We really appreciate it. And it's nice to know that we were better than expected, but heartbreaking to hear that we're even having to have this conversation. So keep up the good work. We, our members will definitely appreciate using that with their crystal balls going forward into 2021. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Linda.
I did have a question.
Do you have a question? Oh,
Yeah, there was a question.
oh, I missed it.
The three county chairs are working. The three county chairs are working on this with the state to get to phase 1, correct?
Okay.
Yes.
For the bowling alleys and stuff?
Yes.
Okay, so
So-
Caitlin did have a chat or a response in the chat room that said the three county chairs are working on this with the state of Oregon to try and get some of our entertainment facilities reopened. So that's really important. Thank you very much again, and we will move on with our show, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next we
Thank
get
you.
to introduce our team from the Oregon State Chamber of Commerce. And I was honored to be the state chair for the Oregon State Chamber of Commerce and work with J.L. Wilson and Jenny Dressler. And our team is so tirelessly working for business. It didn't matter who I would direct towards them or what the question is. They took the time to try and discover how they could support businesses at a greater level. We could not ask for a better team and a better partner. So I'd like to go ahead and read these bios because they're pretty dang impressive. J.L. Wilson comes with a 20-year history in public affairs and lobbying as past executive director of NFIB Oregon, past senior vice president of government affairs and Associated Oregon Industries. He's a full-time lobbyist representing primarily business interests. And prior to that, he served as legislative director for 2 speakers of the Oregon House. Jenny Dressler is the director of grassroots and lobbyist at Public Affairs Council. She previously served as a director of state public affairs policy at the Oregon Farm Bureau, and where she oversaw the execution of OFB's statewide legislative agenda. She is also renowned as one of the state's best advocates on natural resource issues. She began her professional career as an aide to U.S. Senator Roger Wicker in Washington, D.C. She has a bachelor's degree in biology and a master's degree in environmental science with a focus on general business. Let's welcome the super team of JL and Jenny.
All right.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. It would be, just as a precursor to our discussion, it would be impossible to overstate just how complex this year has been. And it's been an honor to assist chambers this year, and I know that it's been exceedingly difficult for everyone. The challenge for us at the OSCC, I think first and foremost, was to keep everybody informed of all the shifting sands with respect to the response, the information. I know nobody wanted to feel left out, and it was just a when the economy was contracting, Jenny and I really had to keep on top of every policy discussion, everything that was going on both at the state and federal level, just to get good information. And then, of course, we had the PPP and other business loan programs that people didn't want to feel like they were last in line. And so getting good information out has really been the crux of our activities for the first several months. And now we've transitioned into sort of issues related to policy response. And one of the things we've noticed is that every interest group, ours included, but certainly all across the political spectrum, has really attempted to use the pandemic as a way to leverage things that they wanted for a long time. So the policy response is where our focus is now. Jenny is going to talk a little bit about that in terms of what the regulatory environment is and what we're dealing with. So let me break out our discussion here because we're going to give you three little chunks of information. Jenny's going to talk about the regulatory environment right now, most of it related to COVID and the things that businesses need to be paying attention to in the here and now in Oregon. The second discussion I'll have for a few minutes just related to elections and what to expect your outcomes to look like and what the political terrain will look like basically on November 4th when it's all said and done. And then Jenny and I will transition into a third discussion item here regarding legislative activity and what to expect the legislature to look like, both in terms of how the legislature even operates, because that's going to be a wildly different environment, and then the issues that we expect to take precedence in an altered 2021 session. So we've got three little discussion topics for you, and Jenny, I will let you proceed with the regulatory landscape.
Thanks, JL. Yeah, I would best characterize, as JL and I were putting together our presentation on the regulatory climate, I think I would best characterize the last, 8 months as a regulatory climate on overdrive. Typically in a legislative cycle, which is a 2-year cycle, our workload as an association, our workload as individuals kind of ebbs and flows, and we're really, really busy during a long or a short session, followed by periods where there's some time to take a breath and kind of come around some of those regulatory changes that were passed by the legislature so that we can best inform or best explain these changes to business and also participate in a rules process that makes these rules easier to implement. This year was an exception to that rule. Almost as, it was 1 or 2 days after the formal sine die of the legislature for the 2020 short session, we saw an executive order declaring an emergency related to COVID-19. And beginning probably mid-March through, I'd say end of July, we were working, as JL said, primarily in response to executive orders that were put forward, and then a series of Oregon Health Authority regulations that seemed to be put forward every other week that regulated your business operations. So we saw the shelter in place or the stay home order and the closures as a result of that, and then saw businesses slowly able to reopen in many counties, but with a new set of regulations in place. And so we really saw our job, at least for the first 4 to 5 months, to get you all the information as it was constantly changing. I'll tell you, that's been one of the biggest challenges of the interim is that Oregon Health Authority continues to promulgate new regulations. There was new facial covering regulations put forward just yesterday that weren't publicized, but that applied to businesses across the state and across the spectrum, not just businesses, but venues and some indoor event centers as well. I think as we look at the indoor kind of conference landscape for 2020. So the regulatory landscape has been incredibly difficult to track, incredibly difficult to weigh in on effectively, given that we aren't really sure what's happening behind closed doors. Decisions are made and we are here to respond. But it just hasn't been a collaborative process. And I think that's, as JL said, we've seen a lot of groups take advantage, business, labor, you name the group, but take advantage of the pandemic as a way to put forward their agendas, and it's made it a really challenging landscape to weigh in on. As many of you are probably aware, OSCC early on was invited to join the governor and her staff on the Economic Advisory Council, where we were able to advocate to get unemployment insurance dollars into the hands of workers and of those independent contractors who were subject to the closure orders. And we also were able to advocate in that space to create small business grant programs to assist individual chamber members who didn't have access to those stimulus dollars that Josh talked about earlier that really did help to stimulate the economy. So we were able to play a productive and positive role. But I would say that what I hear from most of our members is just an awareness of the incredible challenge that it has been for each and every one of them to keep up with the regulatory landscape. I think what has characterized, so we are right now still in this climate of regulatory overdrive. And what has characterized this is, and I think the biggest challenge has been that most of the executive orders and regulations rely on businesses, and you've heard this from Governor Brown, rely on businesses to be to implement social distancing requirements, facial covering requirements. All the onus and the burden has been on the public and private employer to ensure that all of the orders and health guidelines are complied with, which has, as it relates, I mean, we know today that social gatherings are the primary way that COVID is spread, but as the number of cases ratchet up, we still see more and more regulations on businesses as businesses and public employers as the way to try to get our arms around these issues. So I would say that the first 4 or 5 months was characterized for OSCC as an attempt to get our arms around the ever-changing Oregon Health Authority regulations and executive orders. The last 4 months have been incredibly challenging for us as we work to try to mitigate the impact of some of the rules coming out of Oregon OSHA, which are very, very significant and will go into place on November 1st. And then also work to understand what the impact is going to be to our unemployment insurance system and the tax rates that you all are going to see. So I'd say OSCC, and I don't want to take up all the time on this, but OSCC has been, at least from a grassroots perspective, at the forefront of responding to OSHA's temporary COVID-19 regulations, trying to make those workable. We were able to send in 1,600 emails as an entire association, and really did help to change the trajectory to make some of those rules workable. That is going to be still, when those rules are released tomorrow, one of the biggest burdens that businesses, and public employers face going forward throughout the next 6 months. I believe those rules will be in effect for 180 days and will require risk exposure assessments across the board, infection control plans for every business, no matter how small, facial covering requirements, ventilation and HVAC requirements. There are going to be a lot of changes. So I want to say thank you so much for responding to the call for action to help get that issue in front of legislators, but also know that our regulatory climate is not getting better. It's just ratcheting down, especially as we head into the fall. And we're here as a resource for you all to respond. There's also another rulemaking on its way through Oregon OSHA that would increase penalties for 2 paperwork violations back to back to up to $135,000. Those are the kind of issues that we're going to ask you guys to weigh in on, because again, that doesn't serve stakeholders, it doesn't serve workers to have penalties that high. And so we are really looking to you all, and you're going to see an action alert today to help weigh in and say, this isn't the right time to be doing these kind of regulatory actions. Another issue that, in addition to UI, to unemployment insurance program, and trying to work with the employment department to prevent incredible spikes in our unemployment insurance rates, and that is again due to the governor's stay-home orders in Oregon. We are continuing to watch the Department of Environmental Quality's cap and reduce rulemaking. You guys remember Governor Brown issued Executive Order 2004 immediately after the short session adjourned, which creates essentially a cap and trade program without the trade mechanism at the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. This is going to be one of those policies that does impact your manufacturers and their decision to ramp up those operations again, especially as DEQ kind of creates sideboards and a policy around that. So those are just some of the issues that we've been tracking. It's been tough. We know it's been tough for each and every one of you, but we are here to make sure that you have a voice in that process, and we've been really pleased to see the level of engagement. So.
Thanks, Jenny. Let me transition quickly to elections, because we're in the thick of it now, and election season, we just have to get through it. It is, people's nerves are frayed and relationships maybe get a little frayed, and it's just a high intensity period of time, and it just, we get through it every 2 years and work productively after. I don't expect the Oregon legislative landscape to change that dramatically. So the policy impetus that you've seen over the past couple of years, I don't really expect that to be derailed or accelerated one way or another, just because the makeup of the legislature feels to me like it's going to stay relatively stable. The Senate right now, which has been the body that's been, I would say, a little more cautious as we move along, has been sort of a backstop, I'd say, for some of the more aggressive, progressive policies. Currently 18 Democrats, 12 Republicans. I could see that going one seat either way. You could get as many as 19 Democrats, or you could, and 11 Republicans, or 17 Democrats and 13 Republicans. I think it's going to operate in that band of a seat, give or take, either way. The bottom line is it might have some impact on issues where there's revenue raising that requires a 3/5 majority. But keep in mind, the revenue raising sideboards have been so watered down by the courts so as to be only marginally effective. So I still think that 3/5 majority is important for some issues of leverage, but not nearly as important as it was just a handful of years ago. But I could see the Senate being in the 17 to 19 Democratic majority. That it's certainly not going to switch hands, and so it's just a matter of what the balance of power is around the edges. On the House side, clearly a more progressive body, more, I would say, aggressive policy making coming out of the House. 38 Democrats, 22 Republicans. The Democrats could pick up a seat in Bend. That is feels like it could be likely. Republicans could very well pick up a seat in the South Coast area. That also feels fairly likely. Every marginal seat is going to be that's going to be competitive and really in play is currently held by a Democrat, just because they hold so many seats. So there could be 3 or 4 competitive seats in which 1 or 2 might flip. The reality is, though, you're still going to have very significant Democratic control of the House. And so I don't really see the policy trajectory changing much. So, it could go 36, 37, 38 Democrats in the House, and still you have effectively a supermajority, although it might be slimmed down just a touch. So really, I don't expect that to change. The statewide offices, although the races will probably be a little more competitive. then you might think it's hard for me to conclude that the incumbents won't win. So I think your policy landscape is really going to be shaped by who's elected, and I don't see that changing dramatically one way or the other. The House could go slightly more Republican. The Senate will be roughly the same, give or take a seat. And so I don't really expect that what we're dealing with in terms of decision makers is going to change that radically. So what we've seen in 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, I think that course is largely going to continue as we get into 2021. And so with that in mind, I would invite Jenny back to talk about what to expect from the 2021 legislature in two different ways. One, how the legislature is even going to conduct business. That's the first thing. And then second, maybe just a brief touch on some of the issues that we expect to dominate the political landscape during the long session.
Thanks, JL. So yeah, this is going to be a very unprecedented session. There have been conversations probably ongoing for the last couple of months between the lobby and the members of the public and the press and the legislative leadership about whether or not they should delay for several months and come in after cold and flu season in April, or how that body plans to operate should we have a worst case scenario. Yesterday, actually, so this is very timely, JL and I received an update through our professional organization that we are a part of. And they essentially provided a couple of different scenarios that you all could see going into the next session. So in the event that we see an incredible spike in cases this fall and winter, I think that you'll see the legislature operate quite similarly to how it did in the first two special sessions, which is 100% virtual, with opportunities for members of the public to call in remotely, virtual engagement between the public and their legislators, virtual engagement between lobbyists and legislators. And honestly, I will tell you very, very frankly, it's incredibly challenging, 100% virtual, in a 100% virtual world, to engage productively with lawmakers as those policies move through any sort of process. And that's because we can't see what's happening behind the scenes. Typically in the Capitol building, you're part of a circulatory system. So conversation happens in the hall, somebody pulls you aside and says, I'm thinking of amending this bill. I know you have a client who is interested. I know the chambers have concerns about this tax policy. Let's talk about it. And we get to have those dynamic conversations. In a virtual world, in a virtual session, we have not seen that in the last two special sessions from the legislature. We haven't seen that level of public engagement. In fact, in the second special session, we didn't even see an opportunity for public hearings. So those are some of the major concerns that we have. If the legislature does decide to come in 100% virtually, is just that the opportunities for public engagement, even if there is an opportunity for public hearings where people can call in and testify for a minute or two, are so much more limited than they would otherwise be if there was any sort of personal engagement. The other option, which is probably the most likely, is that there are essentially that there are limited opportunities for in-person engagement, adhering to social distancing requirements. So think of plexiglass barriers, masks and shields, not masks or shields, masks and shields, probably worn in the Capitol, limited numbers of people in the Capitol building to enforce and ensure that social distancing can be maintained. Potentially, and as we've seen in other states, signing up to testify in advance so that you're one of the 20 people allowed into the building to come and testify. So it's going to be a very choreographed, if we're able to have any sort of in-person engagement, a very choreographed public process with a lot of forethought and planning by members of the public and by lobbyists so that we can actually engage. The third scenario is a scenario where we don't have any real COVID cases and restrictions kind of fall off and we have a lot more public engagement. I don't see that happening. But as we know that the number of cases are likely going to increase, especially as folks are relegated inside and looking for opportunities to engage socially with their family members and friends. It's human nature to want relationship. It's going to be very challenging to keep those cases from increasing, especially since social gatherings have been the stem So I would say you're probably in scenario 1, 100% virtual, or scenario 2, which is virtual and limited public engagement opportunities as we go into the next session. Either way, I want to underscore the importance of grassroots engagement. And I think you have a Representative Prusak, who is virtually in the chat box, and Gordon from Senator Wagner's office, who is participating as well. They will tell you that during this time, especially as we can't talk to people face to face, grassroots engagement, constituent engagement is that much more important, so that they can get the real impact of the policies that they're considering in their inbox before they have to make a decision. So I just want to underscore how important that is going to be as we head into the next legislative session. What to expect going forward? I think JL and I do expect, and I'll let him talk about this in a little bit, probably some sort of limited third special session after the election. There's probably going to be some level of virtual session in November or December before we head into the next session. But as we go into the next session, what are going to be some of the big policies? I think wildfire funding, wildfire response. We just came out of a natural disaster on top of a global pandemic. That is the forefront of Oregonians' minds, and I think you'll see that at the forefront of legislators' minds as they try to get their arms around the situation that occurred this year and the possibility for a disaster like that to occur in future years. There's gonna be a lot of conversations about revenue. Josh actually painted a really, I thought, good picture of the scenario going forward, and also explaining that the state's coffers didn't take as much of a hit as we thought. But I'll tell you that agencies have been asked to put forward 10 and 20% cut lists. And there is going to be a look from policymakers to say who's going to backfill that delta, which constituency is going to be responsible for funding the remaining balance for state government. We can only sweep so many funds from state agency coffers, and so revenue raising is likely going to be a pretty significant conversation in 2021. And then third, we've seen a lot of workplace policies come out of California, specifically related to independent contracting and the how independent contractors are classified. And also a concept called the Private Attorney General Act, which essentially creates class action lawsuits around any workplace violation. Those have been level 1 threats for the chamber community. We know it's tough enough to navigate the business climate, let alone to create a class action lawsuit against an employer for any paperwork violation. And so those will be the kind of policies that we will watch out for. We've heard from Cal Chamber and other entities in California just how damaging those policies can be to their business climate. So those are some of the things that we're watching out for. I do think that revenue and natural disaster relief and funding are probably going to be some of the two top conversations as we look to keep our state budget whole.
And I'll just wrap up by saying, don't forget that the chief objective of any session year ending with a 1, so 2021 is going to be redistricting. And that's going to be so different now, as that is such a that is such an intense process of going out to various communities and taking testimony, and redrawing of the legislative lines is really, in addition to balancing the budget, probably the primary objective of every session year ending with a 1. So that is going to be, that's one of those things that's not talked about, but will be, it's political blood sport. It is the primary focus of these legislative sessions every 10 years. And so it's just going to be so interesting how that is developed in light of our new reality. As Jenny said, we're going to be paying attention to liability issues with respect to businesses that have complied with EOs and other guidance, and what their liability is for potential lawsuits if there are cases that stem from exposure to a certain business. We're certainly going to be interested in that in the medical field, and that could be a topic of discussion and voting in the upcoming special session. And I'll reiterate what Jenny mentioned with respect to revenue. And you just need to understand, business is going to have a fairly dim view, I think, on revenue increases in light of the CAT And I would say current discussions about separating from the CARES Act, because I think businesses have felt largely, especially your small businesses, have felt like the odd person out on any amount of COVID relief. They've been helped by the PPP federally, but from the state perspective, everybody else has taken priority. And so I think that revenue raising that comes from the Main Street business community is really not going to be something that we're going to be that excited about. And yet we haven't seen any proposals, but keep in mind, the revenue raising discussions is something we're going to have a really keen eye for. So that's just a sort of the 30,000 foot view of legislative topics. Again, liability, revenue, and redistricting in my opinion, are going to be sort of those high-level pillar issues that define 2021. So with that, I'll reiterate Jenny's call for grassroots engagement in a limited, personal touch environment in the Capitol. Grassroots engagement becomes very critical in other ways, and I do think that the Zoom meeting forecast does tend to give some advantages to people that can't spend the day going to Salem, finding parking, finding hotel rooms, all that type of stuff. And so it's something that we need to leverage and take advantage of to the greatest extent possible. And that's something we'll be focused on with OSCC.
JL, Jenny, I really want to thank you for this update. It's unfortunately not all very good news. We have a chat question. Dennis Johnson from Center Street Gold and Silver is asking about any amendments to the gross receipts tax. And, it really affects small businesses that do high volume but operate on low margins. And as a point of reference, I've just heard of 2 pharmacies, small family pharmacies, that are closing because of that exact problem. So communities of Banks and King City are going to be both losing their pharmacies because they do high volume but low margins. Anything that you're hearing that might actually give some relief on that particular issue?
Here's how this process usually goes. Right now, I don't. The DOR is in charge of this and interpretations now, and what there will be is there'll be a settling out period where you see if there are really absurd outcomes and unintended consequences. Mm-hmm. I can tell you right now, there is an incentive for Oregon grown products to be produced out of state as opposed to in-state, because in-state production is taxed, out-of-state production is not taxed. That could very well be considered an absurd outcome. And those are the types of things that ultimately bubble to the surface as we experiment with this and you get a year of this under your belt. Then the legislature probably wants to go back and fix. But I think right now it is what it is, and likely will be until you get some actual data and outcomes from a full year of experience. So I wish I had better news on changes immediately. I think that's going to take a little time.
That's unfortunate. I don't think we have a lot of time for some of these businesses. Just otherwise, in terms of how do we get our businesses to realize the importance of engagement? I mean, we put out the information. I think our chamber, thanks to you guys, looks really good about getting our community informed. But what can we do to support you more? How do we elevate the importance of each one of these issues? When you issue an alert, we pass it on. But is there anything else you want us to be doing?
Well, we make it as turnkey as we can. And as Jenny alluded to, I do think we changed the course of some of these OSHA rules by virtue of the volume. And you just have to have faith that expressing your point of view authentically, and that's my key. And I want to stress that with everybody. Authentic stories are what move policy. And so to the extent that you can personalize and authenticate things, please take the time to do it, because you've got to trust that there are thousands of others who are similarly concerned about policies or have similar benefits or drawbacks, and you need to be able to express those. Legislators are not experts in 5,000 different issues. They only know what is expressed to them earnestly and authentically. And so please take the time to do that. Sorry, Jenny, I interrupted
No,
you.
I think that's great. The other point that I would add is I find that it's very important to communicate successes back. So, you know, we did change the trajectory of the OSHA rules in a very positive way for a lot of our members. They need to know that was because they personally engaged. And so we try to communicate those back. But I know it's challenging right now because we're also mired in all of these rules and all the processes and politics generally. But yeah, authentic communication that is timely, and then the results being communicated back are often the ways that we can see the best engagement.
Well, we appreciate you guys. I feel like you've got our backs. You keep us informed, and you make us look good. You keep us, you know, educated on what's important and how we can engage. And for our audience, just realize that our speakers today have offered to spend an extra 15 minutes after this presentation, and they'll be in the speakers room if you have additional questions and want to go talk to them. But we're now at the end of our presentation today. We thank you so much for spending your time, and we really appreciate all of those who participated, and especially want to thank our sponsors. Thanks to Northwest Natural and our additional sponsors who have supported this series forum of the Key Leaders series. Maybe next year you'll see us back in person, but we hope you found it valuable, and we want you to know that you can trust your Tualatin Chamber to give you the latest information on the impacts to your bottom line. Additionally, we would like to have you mark your calendars. We have an opportunity finally to congratulate and celebrate our 2019 award winners for the Excellence in Business Award celebration that has been rescheduled 3 times and has finally landed virtually on November 12th. It'll be an early evening event from 5 to 7 p.m. And we hope that you'll join us and really have one last final hurrah before we leave 2020. Thanks again for all you do, and please feel free to visit our speakers in the chat room. Have a great afternoon and balance of your week. And P.S. Caitlin, thank you so much for steering this ship. And we also called in one of our chamber CEOs from the South, Mr. Kevin O'Malley with the Wilsonville Chamber of Commerce. We really appreciate your support. Well done.